The new summer event is fast approaching, but we still have one more summer beauty left to cover. Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here, with a servant spotlight for the one servant who you just know is going to be selling bathwater at the shop, Saber Maeve. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers on how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade, comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. Now, onto Maeve's stats. Maeve has a max HP of 13,609 and a max attack of 8,017. Compared to the other 4-star sabers, Maeve has the second highest HP stat next to the Dragon Slayer himself, but she also has the second lowest attack stat, being only beaten out by the infamous Saber Lily. And her stats hold up the same when compared to all other 4-stars as well. Incredibly high HP, but one of the lowest attacks in her rarity. Maeve's stat spread is very defensive, which can be useful for tanks and supports, but her attack suffers greatly because of it. Taking a look at her skills, Maeve's first skill is If I Change Into My Swimsuit, rank A+. It increases her NP gauge every turn for 3 turns, between 10 to 20%, and also grants her between 5 to 10 crit stars every turn for 3 turns, both depending on level. Her second skill is Eau de Toilette, White Honey, rank B. It has a 60% chance of inflicting stun on all enemies for 1 turn, and it also decreases their arch card resist for 3 turns between 10 and 20% depending on level. And finally, her last skill is Queen's Discipline Ocean, rank A. It increases the attack of all allies for 3 turns between 10 and 20%, and it also increases their crit strength for 3 turns between 20 and 30%, both depending on level. For her passives, Maeve has Magic Resistance rank B+, which increases her debuff resist by 18%, and Riding rank A, which increases her quick card effectiveness by 10%. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, Maeve has an Arts Buster deck with Quick, Arts, Buster, Buster, and an Arts Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is One Shot My Love. It deals significant damage to a single enemy with between a 900 and 1500% damage modifier, depending on level. It also has between a 60 and 100% chance of triggering the Nice Shot debuff up to 5 times, depending on overcharge. And it decreases the defense of the enemy by 10% for each stack of Nice Shot. Taking a closer look at her cards, her Quick card hits 4 times, her Arch card hits twice, her Buster card hits twice, and her Extra card hits 5 times. She has an NP gain rate of 0.72% and a star rate of 10%. Maeve has below average NP gain due to the low hits on her Arch cards, and she also has below average star generating for the same reason, and because she only has 1 Quick card. Fun fact, when it comes to material requirements, Maeve shares a lot of them in common with Scotty, so who says DW doesn't have a sense of humor? For Ascensions, Maeve is going to need 6 Seashells, 5 Lanugos, 11 Phoenix Plumes, and 4 Spirit Roots. Seashells can be farmed at the Observatory in Babylonia with a 40% drop rate. Lanugos have an 18% drop rate at Village 67 in Lost Belt 2. Phoenix Plumes are best farmed at the Town Hall in Salem, where they have a 35% drop rate, and Spirit Roots have a 12% drop rate at the Holy City in Camelot. For skill leveling, Maeve is going to require 8 Lanugos, 12 Seashells, 20 Aurora Steels, and 20 Eternal Frost per skill. Aurora Steel can be farmed at the Castle of Ice and Snow in Lost Belt 2 with a 39% drop rate, while Eternal Frosts are best farmed at Yaga Moscow in Lost Belt 1, where they have a 45% drop rate. You know, for a servant who derives her powers from being lewd, Maeve sure has a tame swimsuit compared to some of the other summer servants this year. But what isn't tame is Maeve's stats. Those are all over the place. Maeve benefits from having a tremendously high HP stat, beating out even a good chunk of 5-star servants. But unfortunately, because her stat spread is so heavily invested into her HP, she really suffers everywhere else. Her attack is atrociously low, her NP gain is subpar even despite having 2 Arts cards, and her star generating is also pretty poor. But despite these drawbacks, Summer Maeve does have a few tools in her kit that she can fall back on. Her first skill, If I Change Into My Swimsuit, does a good job of making up for her poor NP gain and star generating by providing her with 20% NP charge and 10 stars per turn. And this is actually a fairly decent piece of utility for not only improving on Maeve's weaknesses, but also providing support to the team. The NP charge helps Maeve reliably access her NP, which can be helpful with team DPS. And the star generating acts as a built-in 2030, so it can reliably support crit teams. This team support playstyle doesn't just end at her first skill though. Maeve's second skill, White Honey, has a low chance of charming all enemies, and it decreases their arch resist by 20%. This skill works almost exactly like Shuten's own charm skill in that it can be a powerful stall tool if Maeve is able to land the charm. But more importantly, the arch resist down can greatly benefit arts teams as it not only improves DPS from arts cards, but NP gain as well. So it's kind of like a conditional, indirect arts buff for the party. And finally, Maeve's best piece of support and utility comes from her third skill, Queen's Discipline. This is a charisma that also buffs crit damage by 30%. This is an excellent skill for supporting crit teams, and it synergizes extremely well with Maeve's first skill, as she can provide both stars and crit damage to the party. The charisma-like attack buff is also a good way of boosting party DPS due to the high uptime and short cooldown. When it comes to skill leveling priority, I recommend leveling Queen's Discipline first because it's such a powerful and reliable damage steroid for the party, followed by change into Swimsuit for better crit support, and then her Charm last because it isn't as consistent. Maeve's Noble Phantasm is a single target arts attack that has a chance to apply a stackable debuff that lowers defense. Basically, the way this Noble Phantasm works is that at 100% overcharge, Maeve will hit the enemy 5 times, and each hit has a 60% chance of applying the Nice Shot debuff, which then turns into a defense down after the Noble Phantasm ends. In other words, the amount of defense the enemy will lose is random, and it can be anywhere between 0% to 50%. The chances to apply a greater defense down can be improved with overcharge, and it's also important to note that debuff resist and success rate also factor in. So enemies with large magic resist are less susceptible to this Noble Phantasm, while Craft Essences and Servants who can buff debuff success rate will improve Maeve's chances of landing the defense down. There are two major issues with this Noble Phantasm. Firstly, the damage is quite poor due to Maeve's super low attack. And secondly, the defense down is inconsistent and too dependent on RNG to be a reliable means of support. If you do have a way of increasing Maeve's debuff success rate though, this NP can be quite powerful for setting up stronger allies. And setting up other allies to do big damage is essentially what Summer Maeve is built for. She can work wonders for an arts crit team, providing them with good steady star generating from her first skill, attack and crit buffs from her charisma, and even improve their NP gain using her second skill, which really helps out arts crit servants who specialize in NP spamming like Saberlot. And provided that you can land Maeve's debuffs, she can massively boost the team's DPS with her Noble Phantasm, and she has a powerful AoE stall on her second skill. While it may not be her best role, Maeve can also function as an offensive DPS servant herself. Between her Noble Phantasm, Arch Resist Down, and Charisma, Maeve has many ways of increasing her own damage output, and when surrounded by good art supports, her damage can be decent. But while Maeve can make for a good crit support and passable damage dealer, she is weighed down heavily by a myriad of issues, chief of which is her inconsistency. Cooldowns play a large role in this, as both her star generating skill and her charm have long cooldowns that prevent them from being useful in longer fights, and the buffs that they do give are too small to be helpful in short fights. And with her first skill on cooldown, Maeve's star generating and NP gain rates plummet, which greatly damages her ability to support the team. The other major contributing factor to her inconsistency is that her best debuffs have a very low chance of hitting. Relying on RNG is not a solid strategy, and more often than not, against enemies with high debuff resist like bosses, Maeve's debuffs will fall flat. And without a charm or big defense down to rely on, all Maeve has is basically just a charisma and a small crit buff. There are ways of improving Maeve's debuff chances, but at the end of the day, she's simply too reliant on luck to provide any consistent support. Furthermore, her damage output is absolutely atrocious unless she can land her debuffs, so there is a huge snowball effect. Maeve works primarily in arts teams where she can play the role of semi-support or more dedicated DPS. I highly advise using her as a semi-support so that she can provide damage and utility to much stronger offensive arch crit servants like Saber Lancelot, Nursery Rhyme, or Uriel. Saberlot is probably the best partner that Maeve can have, as he can make good use of the stars that she generates since many of his cooldowns line up with her own. She also provides him substantial buffs to his damage and NP gain via her charisma and arts down. Similarly, Nursery Rhyme can make good immediate use of Maeve's first skill and her arts resist down to buff her Noble Phantasm damage. Uriel is a good free-to-play option if you're up against male enemies, as if you lead an NP chain with Maeve, then Uriel's NP damage can be potentially massive. If you're using Maeve as your main DPS, then the most important thing she needs are buffs to her debuff success rate and buffs to her arch card effectiveness. So servants like Caster Gil, Tamamo, and Mozart work best for her. Caster Gil is the best choice for her since he can buff her debuff success rate, which makes her much more consistent overall. Tamamo can also significantly buff Maeve's arch card effectiveness and help lower her high cooldowns. Mozart also buffs Maeve's arch cards, and he can lower enemy defense with his Noble Phantasm, so they do have synergy in that regard. Maeve's Bondcraft Essence is one summer album. It increases the NP damage and NP gain of all allies by 10%. This can be useful for supporting other NP spam servants, so it fits well with Maeve's team role. But for supporting, I also recommend using CEs that give passive star generating or increase Maeve's debuff success rate like 2030, His Rightful Place, Demonic Bodhisattva, or Record Holder, all of which help make Maeve much more consistent. For a damage build, stick with CEs that bolster arch card effectiveness like Formal Craft, Dive to Blue, Collide Sapphire, and Emerald Float. This way Maeve can get off as many Noble Phantasms as possible and stack those defense down debuffs. In the future, I recommend looking out for Annual General Meeting. This is a free craft essence that drops spring of next year for the Case Files collab. It boosts arch card effectiveness, NP generating, and passively generates stars. As for command codes, Jeweled Bird's Coat of Arms and Spear of Love, Conduct, and Wisdom are good choices for either supporting crit teams or dealing a little extra damage to charmed enemies, respectively. Overall, Summer Maeve is a decent semi-support for arts teams that has the potential to be quite strong. However, that potential is greatly hampered by her long cooldowns, lack of star generating and NP gain outside of her first skill, very low damage output, and a kit that is built heavily around RNG with low success rate debuffs. However, she does provide some decent damage and utility for arts crit teams through her passive star generating and strong charisma and arts debuff. And if you're able to reliably land her NP debuff, then she can be very powerful. So with all of that said, she gets a C+ from me. She can be a very fun servant to use, and she can provide some very decent support, but unless you're able to get lucky with her debuffs, her kit and utility are severely limited, and she has little else to fall back on. And those are my thoughts on Summer Maeve. It's funny, but if she had a simple skill interlude that buffed her debuff success rate or even the item construction passive, she would be so much better. But still, there are other reasons to roll for Maeve, I'm sure. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you haven't already, do please check out the other Summer Servant spotlights that I have up. They'll be linked on screen and in the description down below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over at our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.